Hello and welcome to the Read to Know podcast, where the goal is to actually remember what you read so then you can better apply it to your life. On this podcast, we go through a book one chapter at a time, and then we actually practice remembering what we've read. So if you want to follow along, we're currently working our way through Bob Goff's book, Dream Big. I'm Zach Brown, and my friend Chris Yarber is joining me to help discuss and break down this book. Also, if you're on Apple Podcasts, it would be huge if you left a rating and review for us. It would help out a ton. If you're not on Apple Podcasts, no worries. Just send this to a friend who might be interested. Anyway, thanks again for listening and enjoy the conversation. So Chris, yesterday on the podcast, we were talking about podcasts. We were talking about exactly that. And, you know, some of our favorite podcasts, some ones that we were excited to kind of dive into and listen to more of. But what's funny about, you know, our conversation about podcasts yesterday and the chapter today is that this chapter 13, we're talking about comparison.
Yeah.
And the title of this chapter is Comparison is a Punk.
I love that.
And, you know, regarding podcasts, I've definitely compared our podcast to others.
Yeah.
Many times.
Yeah, especially when you can watch them when they're also on YouTube or something like that, or you see clips of them. It's easy to compare,
Right.
But you can also hear differences between podcasts as well, because everybody wants their podcast to sound as best as it can.
Right. Yeah. And it's not just out of like jealousy or like, man, I wish our podcast was, but like I'm trying to figure out, what are they doing? Are they doing something different that I should be doing? What mics are they using? You know, that's one thing I've definitely been like, I'm like, what mics are these people using? I need to figure out what mics I should pick up next, or, you know, what gear I need to upgrade, you know what I mean? And I'm looking around comparing podcast to ours, even though we've only been doing this for 3 months now,
Right.
You know, barely 3 months, you know,
Right.
We're still pretty young. But yes, I've fallen into the comparison trap when it comes to podcasts.
Right. And it's really easy to do, not only in podcasting, but in every single area of your life. And so yesterday, just as you mentioned, we started off talking about podcasts, but yesterday's chapter about taking genuine interest in people, what's going to stop you from taking a genuine interest in people is you can fake interest yourself when you compare yourself to other people, but what's going to stop us from genuinely being interested in other people is when we compare ourselves to them. And that's also going to stop us right in our purpose and right in our tracks concerning our ambitions as well. I don't think that anything will stop us faster in our pursuit of our dreams and our ambitions than comparison. It's so easy to do today because we have access to so many people and we have access to so many things that, you know, we have like-minded ambitions. Like, you know, an ambition of ours was to start a podcast. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of podcasts. If we were to spend all of our time comparing ourselves to other people, then you can find, as we've all experienced, how quickly we can become discouraged. And instead of taking genuine interest in other people so that our ambitions can grow, we spend our time comparing, and instead of showing genuine interest, we just end up becoming very nitpicky, becoming very discouraged, and like I said, that kind of stops us in our tracks.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And he makes a couple, you know, good points in this chapter in that, you know, the subtitle is we can tie our hearts together without tying our shoelaces together. And basically what he means by that is we can walk very closely with others. We can even have a lot of the same, basically similar, maybe even almost exact ambitions as someone else.
Right.
But we don't have to monitor everything we do with what they're doing. You know what I mean? We don't, just because someone else wants to start a pod, even, you know, if you broke off and started your own podcast, you know what I mean?
Like the Read to Know podcast part 2.
Right.
Break off. Yeah.
We don't have to compare ourselves to each other, you know. Even though we're doing the same thing, we can still be, you know, connected on a friendship and emotional level without having to get lost in the weeds of being like, whose podcast is better, or he's doing this, and should I be doing this, or
right.
You know. And but also on the flip side of that, there's another kind of side of this coin, is that just because I did a podcast doesn't mean that you can't start one. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's so there's that other side of the coin. It's not like you just because someone else is already doing it doesn't mean that you're like, oh crap, I can't do that now.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because I have a friend who is doing a podcast.
Right.
I can't start one myself because he's already done it. You know what I mean? So our ambitions can line up with other people very closely, but they also don't. Just because someone has already done it doesn't mean that you can't. You're not copying them to do that.
Right. Yeah. And so this is why Bob Goff, I think, wrote this chapter, is to tell us, stop comparing. Don't fall for it. It is a trap. It will get you stuck. It is. I love the title of the chapter, "The Comparison is a Punk," because it's nothing but a jerk to us. And when we get in that rut of comparisons, not only does it stop us, but I also think that it keeps us from seeing the full possibilities of the dream that we once had. I think that I think that, too much comparison really can kill a dream. And so if you've been listening to this podcast trying to think of a dream or ambition that you once had, maybe one thing that stopped you or killed that dream was comparison. So it's good to reflect on that and know that about yourself. But yeah, comparison is a punk.
Right. Yeah. And, it's such a funny thing because it just stops you dead in your tracks, and you lose track of what you're even doing that's significant,
Right.
And the more you stop comparing, the more you can focus on the positive momentum that you're building yourself.
Right.
And, there's also a difference between, like I joked around saying that I was comparing, our podcast to other podcasts.
Right.
And yes, I'm looking for things and stuff like that, but, that's mostly out of, there might be some honest, comparison that's that I shouldn't be making, but most of it is to be, how can I make this better?
Right.
You know what I mean? That's
Yeah.
most of it. I'm like, what, how does their audio sound so good? What can I do to make my audio better?
And when you're looking at it that way, that's really a healthy way of looking at it. That, of course, is not comparison. Looking at someone else who has a similar ambition and trying to learn from that, of course, as we've already read, Bob encourages that.
Partly like how we talked about in the last chapter, but having a friend who has a very similar ambition to you can be a benefit. If you're not stuck in the comparison trap, it can actually be a benefit, because you can look at what they're doing and you're like, how can I take what you're doing and make it work for me in a positive way? How can I better up my game, my skill in this thing? And how can then maybe you can learn something from me as well, maybe, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I learn a lot from friends who have similar ambitions that I do. I learn a lot from those people because they're better at some things than I am when it comes to things that we're both interested in. And so I've learned a lot from friends who think similarly to me and do things similarly to the way I do them, but at the same time, you have to watch out for not falling into that comparison trap.
That's right. Yeah, so important. This is a rather short chapter, again, like most of the ones in this book. Are you ready to get in and pull out some specific quotes?
Yeah, we can go ahead and open it up. There's one last thing I was thinking about here. It might be towards the end of this chapter, but another point that he makes here is just don't look for other people's permission to do things. That's part of what is part of this comparison trap, is that we're looking for other people, looking for their nod of approval and their permission to do these things. And he's just like, forget about what other people think. People could think that's the dumbest thing you've ever done.
Yeah.
If it's something that's inherently good and you have a desire to do it, go for it.
Right.
You know what I mean? And how many times do we get stuck even comparing the thoughts and feelings other people have towards us?
Yeah.
And how that affects even what we do or why we do it.
Right.
How many things would probably people be like, waist deep in if they weren't worried about what other people thought about that thing that they want to get started in.
Right. Yeah. How much further along in your dream or ambition would you already be if you didn't spend that time waiting for someone else's permission, because you can wait and wait and wait, and oftentimes they're not going to give that nod of approval. And as we found in the last chapter, we have to take a genuine interest in other people, maybe to get that nod, or for them to even know, because that's what's so funny about all this comparison is we're comparing ourselves to people that we have no idea. We see a glimpse of their life. We know very little about them. I don't know very much about Bob Goff other than the fact that he's written 3 books and some odd and end things here based on the stories he's told in those books. But I don't. If I were to spend my life comparing him and me, then I would always see that he's so much further along in my eyes in life than I am. And how would I ever catch up to that?
Right.
And so that's the danger with comparison.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, if we just focused on, if we didn't focus on what other people were thinking and we just focused on what we had a desire to do,
yes,
we'd probably all be so much farther ahead in the things that really matter to us.
Right. Yeah.
It's huge. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I want to encourage people who are listening today, because we find a lot of Bob's writing is exactly that. It's encouraging, and he does a good job at that. He writes in this chapter that Paul, from the Bible, wrote to his friends and told them something worth repeating here. He told them to live a life worthy of the calling they, and he emphasizes they had received. In other words, he says, aim for your own target, not everyone else's. Very similar to what you were just saying, that if you want to do something that honors God, stop trying to be someone else and go be you. Figure out on your own ambitions, understand them, own them. And so as he writes here, Paul writes to some people in this letter in Ephesians in the Bible, and he told them, you have a calling. You have a calling. It's yours. It's not anybody else's. It may look like someone else's, but it's not anyone else's. And so really you don't have anyone that you can compare yourself to, because God has made us all distinctly different. So I love that piece of encouragement he throws in there.
Right, yeah. And I love this other analogy that he uses with Matt, the Olympic marksman. Mm-hmm. This guy was hitting bullseyes left and right. Mm-hmm. And he had one more. He had it basically in the bag. And he got a perfect bullseye, but it was on an opponent's target.
Yeah.
And it cost him the gold medal. Mm-hmm. And he says here, Matt hit the wrong target perfectly, but choosing someone else's bullseye cost him the win.
Right.
And confusing someone else's dream for your own, or thinking your dream should be more like theirs, will cost you the prize. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, focusing on even, looking at someone else's life, someone else's ambitions, and being like, I think it needs to be more like that. That can be dangerous.
It can.
Like I said, there's what can I do to make, what can I learn from them?
Right.
That's a whole different conversation. But trying to fit your life around their ambitions is a recipe for disaster.
Yes, because when we do get trapped in this comparison, what we end up doing is we stop chasing our ambitions and we start chasing other people. And we think we're chasing our ambitions because they're chasing their ambitions, and our ambitions are similar, but really we're just chasing them when we're comparing ourselves is really what we're doing. Bob also says in this chapter that whatever dreams are bubbling up in your heart, as we just said, and we've repeated a couple times, there are probably a few people who have done something similar. He says, don't wave off because someone wrote a book on the same topic you wanted to write about. I'm glad that Bob Goff wrote this book. It's an excellent book. There are other books out there on chasing your dreams and your ambitions, but that didn't waver him from writing this book. He says that chasing after your dreams requires clear-headedness and wide eyes that are trained to follow the specific path, in front of you, not the path in front of them. So says what we've already been saying, but just kind of in a different way.
Right, exactly, yeah. And one of my favorite quotes from this chapter, he says, "Don't worry about building consensus around your idea." How many times have I've done that, gone to talking to people, trying to be like, "What do you think about this?" And I want to get multiple people's thoughts before I do something. He says, stop worrying. Don't worry about building consensus around an idea that you have. Stop asking for permission. Get busy with what's happening in your life and stop trying to figure out everyone else's.
Right, and it's good to get other people's opinions, to ask and for insight.
Right,
but getting a consensus, in other words, to to kind of get everyone to be exactly on the same page as you, or for you to somehow get everyone to agree with you, is just not going to happen. So don't wait for that, because we're missing time out on time that we could be using to chase our ambitions and our dreams.
Yeah, he says chasing your dreams requires a clear-headedness and wide eyes that are trained to follow the specific path in front of you, not the path in front of them. And I think that's, kind of an interesting, conclusion to come to, that comparison can kind of fog up your vision,
Yeah.
It fogs up your vision and distorts your direction.
Right. It gets you on that wrong path. It gets you chasing the wrong things. It does a good job at that. Kind of towards the end here a little bit, he says that the world has been telling you there are only a few ways to achieve your ambitions, but that's simply not true. And that's so true. Our world does, they say, go to college, make money, do these certain things, and you'll achieve everything that you want to. But he said that's simply not true, that comparing your path to someone else's or assuming you have to do it the way someone else did it. So not even just comparing yourself to someone else, but comparing yourself to the way that they did it. Because oftentimes when we get to know someone else, our next question is, okay, how did they get to be the people that they are today? I ask that question a lot when I don't know someone. I was doing that with you earlier with another podcaster who is very big in the podcasting world, and I was asking you how did they get to where they are now? So we do that, and so he says that comparing your path to someone else's or assuming you have to do it the way someone else did, it will rob you of your great adventure, which is this chasing your dreams. That if you want to find more purpose in your life, if you're looking to find your own ambitions, help others find the path forward with their ambitions, which kind of reflects us back to previous chapters, and do this without comparison or getting lost in their ambitions, and buckle up for a terrific ride.
Yeah, that was another one of my favorite quotes here. I marked that one as well. And I like specifically that line, that it will rob you of a great adventure. So there's a cost here.
Yes.
Like there's a cost to comparison.
That's right.
And what the cost is losing out on a great adventure.
Yeah.
Because really doing your thing your way, the way you were wired to do it, is an adventure, as he says.
Yes.
And some people, maybe myself included at times, are missing out.
Right.
Because we're getting stuck comparing ourselves to other people.
Right. Yeah, so for those listening and those reading along with us, comparison is a punk. We've also said today that comparison is a trap, and comparison also costs.
Yeah.
Like you just said. Mm-hmm. Yeah, really good.
Yeah, this is a good chapter, man.
It is a good chapter.
Short and sweet, but
it
hits gets right to the point and hits you in the gut.
Yeah, and it's a segue from part 1 of the book to part 2. So if you didn't know this book was divided up into parts, it is. So tomorrow we get into part 2, which is absorb your expectations, and then we get into chapter 14, gather your leaves.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the conclusion of part 1. If you guys had any thoughts on this chapter as well, you wanted to join in on the conversation, talking about comparison being a punk, let us know at Read to Know Pod, all social platforms, or readtoknowpod@gmail.com. Let us know. Yeah, we're tomorrow, chapter 14, part 2, gather your leaves. I think that'll do it for this episode.
I think it will.
All right. Thanks, guys, for listening. See you tomorrow.